A billionaire handed his credit card to a struggling black mother in a crowded American train station and walked away without looking back. He told her there was no limit, no conditions. Less than 40 minutes later, his phone vibrated. The purchase notification made him stop walking, because it wasn't food, it wasn't clothes, and it definitely wasn't luxury. It was something that forced him to question everything he believed about people, poverty, and power. And once he understood what she had done, there was no going back. If stories like this move you, stories about dignity, courage, and unseen strength, take a moment to like and share. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. His name was Oliver Grant, 41 years old, born in London. He grew up surrounded by tradition, expectation, and an unspoken understanding of class and control. His childhood was shaped by quiet rooms, measured conversations, and the belief that emotions were something to be managed, not expressed. From an early age, Oliver learned how to observe rather than participate, how to remain composed even when others faltered, and how to hide uncertainty behind discipline. He was educated at Cambridge, where intelligence was treated like a weapon, and restraint was admired more than passion. There, Oliver sharpened his mind into something efficient and exact. He learned to strip problems down to numbers, probabilities, and outcomes, and to ignore anything that could not be measured. People noticed his ability to stay calm when pressure arose, to decide quickly where others hesitated, and to walk away from difficult choices without looking back. Now, he lived part-time in New York, as the CEO of a global medical logistics firm, supplying hospitals across the United States. His life moved between airports and boardrooms, time zones, and private meetings. His company operated at a scale most people never saw, delivering critical equipment and supplies to hospitals that depended on precision and speed. When systems stalled and bureaucracies slowed, his firm advanced. When delays cost lives, his contracts decided who would receive help first. His company moved faster than governments, not because it was kinder, but because it was ruthless about efficiency. His contracts were worth billions, negotiated in rooms where decisions were detached from consequence, and urgency was framed as strategy. With a single signature, Oliver could determine which hospitals received life-saving equipment immediately, and which ones were forced to wait, sometimes without ever knowing why. People who worked with him described him in the same way every time: brilliant, calculated, cold. They said he never allowed emotion to interfere with outcomes, never softened his stance once a decision was made. Oliver didn't argue with that description. In his world, it was a compliment. He had learned early that feelings slowed decisions and decisions made money, and money was what kept systems running. That belief had been planted long before his career began. Growing up in England, his father had taught him one lesson relentlessly, repeating it until it felt less like advice and more like law. It surfaced during family dinners, during lessons about responsibility, during quiet moments meant to shape a boy into a man. Sympathy is expensive, his father used to say. Always calm, always certain, and poor decisions always wear human faces. Oliver carried that belief with him into adulthood, letting it shape every choice he made. Charity was filtered through accountants, reduced to numbers and tax advantages. Kindness went through legal review, measured for risk and liability. Nothing was given freely, nothing without control, nothing without distance, until the morning everything cracked. He was rushing through Penn Station during a brutal winter cold snap, his coat buttoned tight against the freezing air, his scarf pulled high, his phone pressed firmly to his ear as voices from another world demanded his attention. Schedules, contracts, numbers, deadlines, all layered over one another. His footsteps sharp against the marble floor as commuters streamed past in every direction. Everyone moving fast, everyone focused on getting somewhere else. Then something stopped him, not a sound, not a shout for help, silence. It settled around him in a way that felt heavier than noise ever could. A quiet pocket carved out of the chaos, and before he fully understood what he was doing, Oliver slowed his pace, his steps shortening, his attention pulled toward the tiled wall near the escalators. That was where they were. A black woman sat on the cold floor, her back against the wall, her body curved inward like a shield, wrapped protectively around a sleeping child, her arms locked tight, as if letting go, for even a second, might cause the world to take what little she had left. The girl couldn't have been older than 6, her small frame folded into her mother's coat, her face relaxed in the fragile way only exhausted children sleep. They weren't begging. They weren't asking anyone for anything. They were simply there. Beside them rested a piece of cardboard, edges frayed, letters written carefully in thick black marker. Single mom, lost housing, trying to stay warm. Oliver slowed without understanding why, his body responding before his thoughts caught up. He had passed people like this every day in New York, thousands of times, on sidewalks, in stations, near office buildings, faces blending together until they became part of the background, part of the city's rhythm, but this felt different. The woman looked up, sensing his presence, and their eyes met, and in that instant Oliver noticed what was missing from her expression. There was no performance in her face, no rehearsed sadness, no exaggerated desperation, no manipulation, just exhaustion layered over dignity, a kind of tired that went deeper than sleep, etched into posture and breath, the kind that came from holding everything together for too long with nothing left to give. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice low but steady, shifting as if to stand before stopping herself, careful not to wake the child. "We can move if we're in the way." That apology landed harder than any accusation ever had, harder than anger, harder than blame, because it wasn't for doing something wrong. It was for existing. Oliver felt something tighten in his chest, something unfamiliar, something he didn't have a name for. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising even himself as he lowered down, kneeling there on the cold floor, despite the glances and stares from people rushing past, despite the fact that his tailored coat brushed against Tilithot. Thousands of shoes had walked over Naomi, she said softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the station. "And this is my daughter Zuri." At the sound of her name, the little girl stirred slightly, shifting closer, her fingers curling into the fabric of her mother's sleeve, but she didn't wake. "How long have you been out here?" Oliver asked, his voice quieter now, slower, as if time itself had begun to stretch. Naomi hesitated, her eyes dropping for a moment, her jaw tightening like she was bracing herself. "For months." The words echoed inside him, heavier than any number he had seen on a balance sheet, heavier than any loss his company had ever absorbed. Oliver felt the pressure build in his chest, a tightening that made it hard to breathe for just a moment. His phone buzzed again in his hand, vibrating insistently with messages from executives, assistants, people waiting for decisions only he could make. For once he didn't look, for once he ignored them, without giving himself time to analyze it, without allowing the familiar voice of caution to interrupt. Oliver reached into his wallet and pulled out a sleek black credit card, the kind that never declined, the kind that didn't ask questions, the kind most people only saw in movies or behind glass counters. The motion was instinctive, almost reflexive, as if something older than logic had taken control. Naomi's eyes widened the moment she saw it, not with greed, not with excitement, but with fear, the kind that came from being offered something that felt too big, too dangerous, too impossible. "I don't want money," she said quickly, her voice tight as she instinctively pulled Zuri closer, as if the card itself might threaten what little stability she had managed to protect. "I just need time." The words caught Oliver off guard, because they weren't what he expected. They weren't what people usually said when help appeared. There was no reaching, no pleading, just a quiet request for breathing room. "This isn't charity," Oliver replied, the words leaving his mouth before he fully understood where they came from, surprising even himself as much as they surprised her. "It's trust." The word felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, hanging between them like something fragile. He gently placed the card into her hand, closing her fingers around it before she could pull away, feeling how cold her skin was against his own. 24 hours, he said calmly, deliberately, as if setting the terms would keep him steady. "No limit, no conditions, use it however you want." Naomi stared down at the card like it might vanish if she blinked, like it was a test she didn't know how to take, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible, heavy with confusion and disbelief. Oliver didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Zuri, sleeping peacefully against her mother's chest, unaware of how close her world was to changing. Her face relaxed in a way that only children trusted enough to sleep could manage. "Because I want to know what someone with nothing does when given everything," he said quietly. And before Naomi could find the words to respond, before she could refuse or argue or give the card back, Oliver stood up, turned away, and walked back into the moving crowd, leaving the question and the choice in her hands. Oliver didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. His penthouse felt unusually quiet despite the city humming far below, the lights outside his windows glowing without warmth. He stood by the glass for hours before finally sitting down, his phone resting in his hand like something alive. He opened the banking app and left it there, the screen glowing softly in the dark, refreshing it again and again like someone watching. A heartbeat monitor, waiting for proof of life, or proof of failure. Minutes passed, an hour slipped by, then another, the silence stretching longer than he expected, his mind filling the gaps with his father's voice, with warnings he had heard his entire life, with assumptions he had never truly questioned. Still nothing. He checked the time again, his jaw tightening, wondering if she was afraid to use it, or if she was planning something bigger, something reckless, something that would confirm everything he had been taught to believe. Then at 6:12 in the morning, his phone vibrated sharply against a table. Transaction approved. $34.91. Pharmacy. Oliver stared at the number, his breath catching slightly, imagining shelves of medicine. Over-the-counter pain relief, cold medicine, vitamins. Things most people never thought twice about but mattered. When you were trying to keep a child healthy, another alert followed almost immediately. $48.07. Discount clothing store. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in focus, picturing winter coats on clearance racks, gloves in mismatched bins, socks folded too thin to hold heat for long. Then another notification appeared. $22.13. Local grocery. Bread, fruit, milk, simple food. Food that filled stomachs instead of impressing anyone. No hotels, no luxury, just survival. Oliver leaned back slightly, something heavy shifting inside his chest, something that didn't have a name yet. Then one more notification appeared on the screen. Donation, $100, Community Shelter Fund. Oliver froze. Read it again, then again, as if the numbers might change if he looked too long. Donation. She had given money away, not because she had plenty, not because she was safe, but because she understood need better than anyone. Oliver sat down hard, the chair scraping softly against the floor, the weight of that single choice landing heavier than any business loss he had ever experienced. In that moment, the world he thought he understood cracked wide open. He returned to Penn Station before sunrise, the city still half asleep, the air sharp with cold and early morning quiet, the crowds thinner now, footsteps slower, voices hushed. He scanned the familiar stretch of tiled wall near the escalators, with a strange mix of anticipation and fear settling in his chest. Naomi was there, in the exact same place, but everything about her felt different. Zuri was awake now, sitting close beside her mother instead of sleeping in her arms, wrapped in a new winter coat that actually fit, thick and warm, the kind meant to block wind instead of letting it through. Real boots covered her feet, sturdy and dry, not soaked sneakers, not frozen socks. Her hair was neatly braided, careful and clean, each braid done with intention despite circumstances that offered no comfort. Tucked under her arm was a small stuffed animal, held close like something precious, like proof that childhood hadn't been completely taken from her. Oliver stopped a few steps away, his breath catching before he realized it had, because the change was impossible to miss. Naomi saw him and stood quickly, almost instinctively, like she was afraid of doing something wrong, her hand already reaching into her pocket, pulling out the black card and holding it out toward him before he could speak. "I was going to return it," she said, her words coming fast, her voice tight with worry. "I swear I was." Oliver shook his head gently, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "Keep it," he said, calm and steady. "You still have time." Naomi hesitated, her fingers tightening around the card before lowering it slightly, her eyes dropping as if she was bracing herself. "I bought what my daughter needed," she said quietly, not defensive, not proud, just honest. "And I gave the rest to the shelter." The words took a moment to land. "You're homeless," Oliver said slowly, carefully, as if saying it too fast might break something. "And you donated money." Naomi met his eyes, her expression soft but firm, like someone who had already made peace with her choice. "There are women there with babies," she replied, her voice steady. "They need help too." In that moment, something shifted inside Oliver Grant, something deeper than surprise, deeper than admiration, something no boardroom presentation, no leadership seminar, no quarterly report had ever taught him. He understood, with absolute clarity, that poverty did not erase character, it revealed it. Within hours, everything began to change, not slowly, not cautiously, but with a momentum that felt unreal to Naomi, as if the ground she had been standing on for months was finally becoming solid beneath her feet. A hotel room replaced the cold tile floor, not luxury, not excess, but warmth, clean sheets, a door that locked, a space where Zuri could sleep without noise or fear, where Naomi could finally sit down without watching the clock or the crowd. Legal aid stepped in quickly, helping recover documents that had been lost during months of instability. Birth certificates, identification, records that had quietly become barriers to every opportunity, each piece of paper. Restoring a small part of control Naomi hadn't realized she had lost. Job placement followed, not with promises but with real interviews. Steady hours, predictable pay. Work that allowed Naomi to breathe instead of constantly scramble. Work that didn't punish her for needing stability. Zuri was enrolled in school, given supplies, a schedule, teachers who learned her name, classmates who didn't know her past, a place where she could be a child instead of a survivor. This wasn't framed as charity, it wasn't presented as generosity, it was correction. Oliver moved just as quickly behind the scenes, reviewing systems he had once trusted without question, rewriting company policies within weeks, expanding worker protections that acknowledged reality instead of ignoring it, ensuring no one disappeared inside his organization without notice. Again he funded housing partnerships, quietly, deliberately, without press releases or speeches, without turning human lives into marketing. The changes happening where cameras never looked. Naomi rebuilt her life piece by piece, not overnight, but steadily, with dignity intact, with support that didn't come with shame. Zuri laughed again, freely, loudly, the way children do when they feel safe, her world no longer measured by cold nights and long waits. And Oliver learned how to see people he had once walked past, not as background, not as statistics, but as lives that mattered, lives that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. This isn't a story about money, not really. Money is just the surface, the tool. The thing people focus on because it is easy to measure. This is a story about blindness. The quiet kind that settles in slowly, the kind that grows comfortable, the kind that convinces itself nothing is wrong, because everything appears to be working. It is about how power learns to look away, how it explains suffering as unavoidable, how it tells itself that hardship is just part of the system, that someone else will handle it, that numbers matter more than names. It is about how easily people become invisible when they are no longer useful, how quickly exhaustion is normalized, how survival is mistaken for weakness, and it is about how all of that can be undone, not by grand speeches or sweeping declarations, but by a single choice made in an ordinary moment, a choice to stop, to look, to listen. Sometimes the smallest decision carries the greatest weight, because it exposes a truth that has been buried for too long, that people do not lose their humanity when they lose their homes, that desperation does not erase kindness, that dignity survives even when comfort does not. Courage does not always shout. It does not always arrive with applause or recognition. It does not always look heroic from a distance. Sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes it is inconvenient. Sometimes it simply chooses love when greed would be easier. And in that choice, everything begins to change.